Sold by her own family as infertile, a betrayed girl is delivered to the feared vampire king as a worthless bargain. But within just 3 days, she becomes pregnant, proving the lie and awakening a rare bond neither of them expected. Instead of discarding her, the king claims her fiercely, loves her deeply, and turns her suffering into power. I've heard people say fate is just a fancy word we use when we don't understand pain. But after what happened to Elara at Blackthorne Castle, I'm not sure fate is the right word at all. Maybe it was mercy, arriving in a monster's hands. Rain stitched the night together as the carriage climbed the mountain road, lantern light trembling across wet stone. Elara sat very still, not because she was calm, but because moving felt like admitting she was truly leaving her life behind. Her fingers kept finding the thin blue ribbon hidden in her pocket, a scrap from childhood she couldn't let go of, like it could anchor her to the person she used to be. They had sold her with a smile. Not with chains or screaming, but with quiet paperwork and tidy lies. Infertile, her family said, as if it were a stain she had chosen. The broker repeated the word like a price tag. Elara remembered the way her mother avoided her eyes, the way her father nodded as if this was for the best, and the way Elara's own voice disappeared somewhere in her throat. She had learned something sharp and simple. Betrayal doesn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrives dressed as responsibility. Blackthorne Castle rose from the mist like an old secret that never wanted daylight. The gates opened on their own, slow and patient, and warm air rolled out as if the place had been breathing for centuries. Inside, candlelight glowed against dark wood and stone, and the halls smelled of cedar, rain-soaked pine, and something faintly sweet, like roses pressed inside a book. Elara was led to a chamber that looked more like a library than a prison. There were heavy curtains, a crackling fireplace, and a table set with water and bread. No locks clicked behind her. No guard stood too close. That almost frightened her more than cruelty would have because she knew how to survive harshness. She didn't know how to survive confusion. A soft flutter came from above. A small bat swooped down and landed on a curtain rod, staring at her with bright, judgmental eyes. It made a tiny sound that felt oddly like a sigh. Elara, a deep voice said, calm enough to make the room feel smaller. Oh, she turned and saw him. Kael, the vampire king, stepped into the light without any dramatic flourish. He was tall, dressed in dark velvet that caught the firelight in quiet waves. His face was striking, yes, but it was the stillness in him that held her, the kind of control you only see in someone who has carried too much for too long. His eyes were pale and watchful, but not hungry, not cruel. Tired. Elara stood quickly, the chair scraping the floor. Her heart beat too fast, as if her body was trying to run without her. She forced her chin up anyway, because even if she had been sold, she refused to arrive as broken as they claimed. Kael stopped several steps away, as if he understood that fear needs space to breathe. His gaze flicked to her hands, bruised knuckles from old work, small cuts half-healed, then to the tear in her sleeve that someone had tried to stitch with impatient thread. They told my counsel you were unable to carry life, he said, voice steady, almost careful. They said it like a certainty. Elara's throat tightened. They said it like my name. Something changed in Kael's expression, quick as a shadow crossing a candle. Not anger at her, anger at the situation, at the people who had packaged her pain into a convenient lie. How convenient for them, he murmured. He didn't come closer. Instead, he moved to the table, picked up the glass of water, and held it out, two hands respectful, like he was offering peace and not testing her obedience. Elara hesitated, then took it. The water was cool and clean, and the simple kindness hit her so hard she almost forgot to swallow. You're not what I expected, she admitted, hating how small her voice sounded in a room this large. Kael's mouth lifted slightly, not quite a smile. Most people are. The bat above them chirped again, as if offended by the seriousness. Kael glanced up. That's Moth, he believes everyone is late. Despite herself, Elara let out a tiny breath that was almost a laugh. He looks like he wants to scold me. He does, Kael said, and for a moment, his tone held something startlingly human, dry humor, gentle, familiar. Then the softness in him folded back into restraint, like he had learned not to show too much. He reached into his coat and placed a sealed letter on the table between them. The wax stamp bore a crest Elara didn't recognize, but the sight of it made Kael's shoulders tense, as if paper could cut deeper than a blade. "This arrived before you did," Kael said. "It warned me you would come." Elara stared at the seal. "Who sent it?" Kael didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, not with suspicion of her, but with the kind of focus someone has when they're standing near a cliff edge and listening to the wind. "A seer," he said finally, "or a liar. Either way, the letter claims your family didn't sell you to punish you. They sold you to trigger something ancient." Alara's stomach turned cold. "Trigger what?" Kael's voice dropped lower, the fire popping softly behind him. "A vow tied to this castle, a vow my bloodline tried to bury." He held the letter but didn't break the seal. He looked at her as if asking permission to let truth into the room. Elara nodded once, because fear had already been her companion for years, and she was tired of it controlling the story. Kael broke the wax carefully and unfolded the page. His eyes moved across the lines, and the color seemed to drain from his face, not from hunger, not from rage, but from something that looked dangerously close to dread. Then he read aloud, and every word felt like a bell inside Alara's ribs. "The barren bride is not barren. She is hidden. In 3 days, life will wake where lies were spoken, and the king will be tested by love rather than power." Elara's hands went numb around the glass. That's impossible." Kael looked up at her, and in his eyes was something she didn't expect from a vampire king, quiet panic wrapped in fierce control. "I know," he said, almost whispering. "That's why I'm afraid it's true." The room seemed to hush, even the bat going still. Elara's skin prickled, and she felt a strange warmth bloom under her sleeve, like a pulse that didn't belong to her. She pushed the fabric back and froze. A faint crescent-shaped mark had appeared on her wrist, braided with tiny thorn-like lines, glowing softly as if it had been waiting for this exact moment to reveal itself. Kael stared at it as if he'd seen a ghost walk into his home. "That mark," he said, voice strained with recognition, "only appears when the vow accepts its chosen one." Elara's breath caught. Chosen for what? Before Kael could answer, the castle itself seemed to respond. Deep beneath the floors, a low, ancient vibration rolled through the stone, like a giant heart beginning to beat. The candles flared brighter all at once, and somewhere far down the corridor, armored footsteps rushed toward the chamber. Kael stepped between Elara and the door without thinking, protective as a shield, his composure cracking just enough to show the truth underneath it. "They're coming," he said, eyes fixed on the glowing mark. "My counsel, if they see this, they'll try to claim you as a symbol." Elara's wrist burned warmer, and the strange heartbeat in the castle grew louder, steadier, like it was counting down. Kael reached for her hand, then stopped inches away, giving her one last choice. "Elara," he said, and the way he spoke her name sounded like a promise and a warning at once. "Do you trust me enough to run?" Stone rang with hurried footsteps, and the castle's deep heartbeat grew louder as Kael guided Elara through a narrow side corridor lit by sleepy torches. The air here smelled of dust and old parchment, like a place that kept secrets for a living. Alara's wrist still glowed under her sleeve, warm enough to make her skin tingle, and every few steps she felt it pulse, steady, certain, like the castle was counting time. Kael didn't pull her. He stayed half a step ahead, always glancing back to make sure she was keeping up, always leaving space for her to choose. That small restraint did something strange to Alara's fear. It didn't vanish, but it softened around the edges, the way a storm softens when someone opens a door and says, "Come in." Moth fluttered above them like an anxious little guardian, occasionally swooping low as if pointing out the fastest turns. When Elara nearly slipped on the smooth stone, Kael caught her elbow with quick, careful fingers, then let go immediately as if he was afraid of stealing her breath. "Why are they running?" Elara whispered, hearing the echo of voices now sharp, urgent, controlled. Kael's jaw tightened. Because the council doesn't believe in coincidence, they believe in ownership. He pressed a palm to the wall, and a hidden seam appeared, opening into a tight stairwell that spiraled down. Warm air rose from below, carrying the scent of lavender oil and iron-rich earth. Elara hesitated at the mouth of the stairs, suddenly aware that every step deeper meant stepping further away from the life her family had written for her, even if that life was cruel. Kael noticed. He lowered his voice, steady as a promise. If you want to leave, I will take you to the village road myself. I won't hide you. I won't lock you. I won't bargain with your life. Alara's throat tightened at the words she had never heard from anyone with power. And if I stay? Kael's eyes flicked to her wrist again, and something protective sharpened in him. Then I will stand between you and every old rule in this castle. They descended. The staircase opened into a small chamber that looked nothing like a dungeon. It was clean, warm, lined with books, and a simple couch with a blanket folded neatly on top. A kettle rested near a tiny hearth, and the room carried the quiet comfort of a place made for someone who needed to breathe. Kael shut the hidden door, and the noise of pursuit dulled, but didn't disappear. It was still there, like thunder behind mountains. This was my mother's room, he said, as if the confession slipped out before he could stop it. When she wanted silence from court, she came here. Elara turned to him slowly. Your mother, was she human? Kael's expression softened in a way that made him look younger than his crown. Yes, she was kind, and the court called it weakness. She taught me that power without gentleness is just fear wearing expensive clothes. The words landed in Elara's chest. Kindness, gentleness. Her family had treated those things like luxuries that only belonged to the lucky, yet here was the vampire king speaking of them like laws he actually obeyed. Above them, voices swelled closer. A heavy knock struck the wall once, twice, like authority trying to break its way into the room. Kael exhaled slowly, then reached into a drawer and pulled out a ring. It wasn't jeweled, not flashy, just dark metal etched with a simple vine pattern that matched the shape of her mark. Elara stiffened. No, I won't be trapped again. Kael held the ring out on his open palm like an offering that could be refused. It isn't a shackle, it's a seal. If you wear it, the council can't touch you without breaking the oldest law they still fear. And what do you get? Elara asked, hating how much she wanted to believe him. Kael's answer came quietly, and it was worse than any demand because it sounded like truth. Time, 3 days. Elara's breath caught because of the letter. Kael nodded. The vow moves in threes. The council knows it. They'll push a trial to force the prophecy open like a locked door. Another knock thundered, closer now, followed by a voice that carried through stone with practiced command. Your Majesty, a woman called, calm and cold. Open the passage. We have seen the light. The mark has returned. Kael's eyes hardened, but his voice stayed gentle when he spoke to Elara. That is Lady Seraphine, my high counselor. She smiles while she measures your worth. Elara swallowed. And what do they think my worth is? Kael's gaze dropped for a moment, and when he lifted it again, there was a quiet shame there. Humility from a king who didn't pretend his world was clean. They think you are a doorway to an heir to control, to the kind of stability they can sell to frightened nobles. Alara's stomach twisted. She remembered her family's polite voices, the way they had used her like an object to fix their debts and protect their reputation. Different castle, same hunger. I can leave, she said suddenly, the courage surprising even her. If I disappear, they can't use me. You can tell them it was a lie, a mistake, anything. Kael stepped closer, not invading, just enough that his presence felt like a wall against the storm outside. Elara, listen to me. His voice lowered, and the room seemed to hold its breath. I have ruled for centuries, he said. I have won battles without lifting a hand. I have survived poison in wine and praise with knives hidden inside it. But I have never forgiven myself for the times I stayed silent because speaking would have been inconvenient. Elara's eyes stung and she blinked hard. So speak now. Kael's lips parted as if he hadn't expected her to hand him the courage he was asking for. Then, slowly, he nodded. He turned toward the hidden door and placed his hand against it. The stone shivered and the seam appeared again, opening with a sigh. Cold air rushed in, carrying torch smoke and the faint metallic scent of armor. Kael stepped out first. Elara followed, heart hammering, as the corridor filled with figures in dark formal robes and polished insignias. They weren't snarling monsters. They looked like officials, like people who could ruin your life with ink and tradition. Lady Seraphine stood at the front, elegant and composed, her hair pinned like a crown of discipline. Her eyes landed on Elara's sleeve, precisely where the glow refused to fully hide. "Your Majesty," Seraphine said, inclining her head just enough to pretend respect, "you brought an outsider into the heart of our law." "She is under my protection," Kael replied, voice calm but absolute. Seraphine's gaze sharpened, almost pleased. "Protection is not the same as legitimacy." Elara felt Kael shift slightly, putting himself between Seraphine and her wrist without making it obvious. The gesture was small, but it told Elara everything. He wasn't performing kindness. He was choosing it. Seraphine lifted a sealed parchment. By ancient statute, when the mark of the vow appears, the court must hold a Moon Tribunal. 3 nights, 3 tests, 3 witnesses. If the vow is real, it will prove itself. Kael's eyes narrowed. "You want to turn a human woman into a ceremony." Seraphine's smile was polite enough to belong at a banquet. "We want to confirm what she is, for the good of the kingdom." Elara's hands curled into fists at her sides. For the good of the family, for the best. She had heard that excuse used like a weapon her whole life. Kael spoke again, and his voice carried a hidden heat that never rose into cruelty, only conviction. "If you force her, you will create the very danger you claim to prevent." Seraphine's attention finally shifted to Elara's face, as if she just remembered Elara could think. "Child," she said softly, "if you are truly barren, you have nothing to fear. The tribunal will clear you and you will be free." The words were honey over a hook. Elara felt the trap close around her options: refuse and be labeled guilty, accept and be used. Before she could answer, the mark on her wrist flared through the fabric, bright enough to cast a pale crescent of light across the stone floor. Several counselors recoiled on instinct. Even Seraphine's mask slipped for half a breath. Kael's hand rose, not touching Elara, just hovering near her as if asking permission to anchor her. "Elara," he murmured, "look at me." Well, she did, and the steadiness in his eyes steadied her too. Seraphine recovered first. "The castle has chosen," she said, voice calm again, but now threaded with urgency. "3 nights, Your Majesty, or we will declare you unfit to rule." The corridor went silent, as if the torches were listening. Kael didn't shout, he didn't threaten. He just turned his head slightly toward Elara, and in that quiet motion she felt the weight of his decision pressing against her life. Then he faced the council. "Very well," Kael said, each word controlled and dangerous in its restraint. 3 nights, but the first rule is mine." The Seraphine tilted her head. "And what is that?" Kael's eyes didn't leave hers. "No one touches her, not for tradition, not for proof, not for fear." The Seraphine's smile thinned. "We shall see if the vow respects your rule." As the counselors began to withdraw, the castle's deep heartbeat returned, slow, insistent, like a clock starting its countdown. Elara looked down at her wrist, and beneath the glow she felt something else now, something new and unsettlingly gentle, like warmth gathering in the center of her body for reasons she couldn't name. Kael noticed the change in her breathing. His face tightened with sudden concern. "Elara," he whispered so only she could hear, "tell me the truth, do you feel that?" Before she could answer, the torches along the corridor flared out in a single wave of darkness, one after another, until only the crescent glow from her wrist remained, lighting Kael's face in ghostly silver. And in the dark, a voice that did not belong to any counselor spoke from somewhere inside the castle walls. 3 days it breathed ancient and certain. Do not fail her. The torches flared back to life in a slow ripple, as if the castle had only blinked. The counselors stood frozen for one stunned moment, their polished authority suddenly looking like a costume that didn't fit. Kael didn't chase their fear or savor it. He simply turned his body a fraction toward Elara, shielding her from the corridor like it was instinct, not strategy. Lady Seraphine recovered first, smoothing her robes as if darkness was an inconvenience she could discipline away. A voice in the walls is not law, she said, but her eyes kept flicking to Elara's sleeve, where the crescent glow still pulsed like a living thing. The tribunal begins at moonrise. Be present, your majesty. When they finally left, their footsteps faded into distance, but the pressure they'd brought lingered in the air. Elara realized her shoulders were locked up near her ears. She forced them down, breathing carefully as if calm could be built one breath at a time. Kael guided her back through the hidden passage, not rushing her, matching her pace when she slowed. In the small chamber that had once been his mother's refuge, he shut the door and leaned his forehead against the stone for a second, just a second, like a man borrowing strength from a wall. I'm sorry, he said, voice quiet. Elara blinked. For what? For bringing you into a storm I've been ignoring for too long. He turned to face her, the firelight catching the edge of his tired eyes. I thought I could keep the old laws asleep. I thought if I was careful and useful, the council would stop reaching for control. Elara surprised herself by answering honestly. That sounds like what my family did. They kept calling it being practical. Kael's gaze softened with recognition, as if her words had found a bruise he didn't admit was there. Practicality is often a mask for cowardice, he said. Then he added with humility that didn't feel rehearsed, and I have worn that mask. A tiny squeak came from the curtain rod. Moth the bat was hanging upside down, rocking slightly like an impatient metronome. He chirped twice, then fluttered in a tight circle over Kael's head like he was trying to shoo the sadness out of him. Elara let out a small, helpless laugh. I think he's offended by the mood. Kael's mouth twitched, almost a smile. He prefers action. He thinks feelings should be solved by flying at them. The joke should have been nothing, but it warmed something in Elara that had been cold for a long time. She realized she was watching Kael the way you watch someone who might be safe, carefully, hopefully, afraid to believe it. Kael walked to the small cabinet and poured water again, then hesitated, listening. Somewhere above, the castle settled with an old creak. Beyond that, a distant murmur, guards changing positions, doors closing, the tribunal machinery waking up. The voice you heard, Kael said, belongs to the Heartstone. Elara's fingers tightened around the glass. The castle is alive. Not alive like you, Kael replied, more like a promise with a pulse. Long ago my ancestors bound a spirit to this place. It protects the throne and punishes those who break the vow it guards. Elara's wrist warmed at the mention of it, like the mark was listening too. What vow? Kael's eyes lowered, and when he spoke again, it was with a careful honesty that felt like a gift. A vampire king once loved a human woman enough to change the laws for her. The court called her a threat. They tried to break her. And when they did, the king bound the Heartstone so that one day the castle would recognize someone like her again, someone the powerful tried to discard. Elara swallowed, someone like me. Kael's voice turned quieter, someone who was told she had no future. Silence fell between them, heavy but not cruel. Elara didn't know what to do with the fact that a king, an immortal one, was speaking to her like she was a person and not a problem. Then Kael lifted his head, and the gentleness in him sharpened into purpose. Tonight is the first trial. You will be given choices that are not truly choices. They will dress traps in polite language. Elara felt fear rise again, but underneath it, something sturdier stirred too. What do they want from me? Kael didn't sugarcoat it. They want you to prove you are worth using. Elara's voice came out steady, surprising her. And what do you want? Kael's answer was immediate. I want you to survive this without losing yourself. That hit harder than romance. harder than flattery because it was about her soul, not his desire. Elara's eyes stung, and she looked away quickly, pretending to study the bookshelf so he wouldn't see how close she was to breaking. On the shelf, a small silver-framed portrait caught her attention. A human woman with warm eyes stood beside a younger Kael, his posture stiff as if he hadn't known how to be held. The woman's hand rested on his shoulder anyway, gentle and stubborn. "That's your mother," Elara said softly. Kael nodded. She used to say something that made the council furious. He glanced at the portrait, the corner of his mouth tightening with grief. She said, "If you must rule, rule like someone who remembers what it's like to be afraid." Elara turned back to him. Did she die because she said things like that? Kael didn't answer at first. He crossed to the hearth and adjusted the kettle, busying his hands like the motion could keep old memories from spilling out. She died because the world loves kindness until kindness asks it to change. Alara's chest tightened. The message was clear without cruelty. Even here, with velvet and candlelight, power could still crush gentleness if no one defended it. A knock sounded soft, respectful. Kael's posture shifted instantly, protective and controlled. "Enter." A young servant stepped in carrying a tray. "Your Majesty, Lady Seraphine sent this, tea for the guest. She said it will ease the nerves before the tribunal." Alara's stomach dipped. Something about the servant's careful eyes, too careful, made her uneasy. Kael stared at the tea as if it had spoken. Moth fluttered down, landed right beside the cup, and pecked at the rim with offended determination. Kael didn't touch the tray. "Leave it," he told the servant, "and tell Seraphine my guest eats and drinks only what I provide." The servant bowed and hurried out. The moment the door shut, Kael exhaled through his nose, a quiet, dangerous patience. She's testing boundaries. Elara stared at the tea. "Is it poisoned?" Kael's gaze flicked to her face, then to her wrist. Not to kill, Seraphine rarely wastes effort on something so obvious. He paused, to dull the mark, perhaps, to blur the vow, to make you easier to steer. Elara felt heat climb her throat, anger, clean and bright, so she can keep calling it for the good of the kingdom. Kael met her eyes. "Yes." Elara stepped forward, lifted the cup, and walked to the hearth. Her hands trembled, but her voice didn't. "Then we don't drink it." She poured the tea into the fire. The flames hissed, and for a heartbeat the smoke curled into a strange crescent shape before disappearing. Kael watched her, something like pride and sorrow mixing in his expression. "That," he said quietly, "was courage." Elara swallowed. It felt like choosing to breathe. Moonrise arrived like a verdict. They walked through the main corridor together, the castle brighter now, candles lit in long rows, polished floors reflecting gold. Guards stood at intervals, not threatening, just present, reminders that tradition had muscles. Elara's dress had been replaced with something simple and soft, deep green fabric that warmed her skin. Kael had chosen it, not the council, and that mattered more than the cloth itself. As they passed a window, Elara caught her reflection and almost didn't recognize herself. Not because she looked like royalty, but because her eyes looked awake. Hurt, yes, afraid, yes, but not erased. They entered the Moon Tribunal hall, wide, circular, open to a domed ceiling of dark glass where the moon shone through like a single watching eye. In the center stood a shallow basin filled with still water that reflected the moonlight so perfectly it looked like another sky. The council sat in a half-circle, Seraphine at the center, composed as a blade laid neatly on velvet. "Welcome," Seraphine said, voice smooth. "The first night is the test of voice." Elara's skin prickled. Kael's attention sharpened, but he didn't interrupt. He watched, reading the room the way a battlefield commander reads silence. Seraphine continued, "The marked one will speak into the Moonwell. If she lies, the water will cloud. If she speaks truth, the water will hold her words and return them to us." Elara's mouth went dry. "Return them how?" Seraphine smiled slightly. "As visions, memories, the kind people hide." Elara understood then, this wasn't about truth. It was about humiliation. If they could make her feel small, she'd become manageable. Kael's voice cut in, calm but firm. You said no one would touch her. We will not touch her, Seraphine replied. We will only listen. Kael turned to Elara, lowering his voice so only she could hear. You don't have to speak what shames you, speak what saves you. Elara's heart hammered. She stepped forward anyway because she was tired of running from other people's definitions. The Moonwell water was so still it made her dizzy, like looking down into a quiet truth you couldn't climb out of. She stood at its edge, moonlight on her face, and felt the mark on her wrist pulse in rhythm with her breathing. The Seraphine's voice floated across the hall. State your name. Elara wanted to say it the way she'd been trained. Small, apologetic, easy to overlook. Instead, she straightened her spine. My name is Elara, she said, and her voice echoed softly under the dome. And I am not a defect. A stir ran through the council. The Moonwell water shimmered, but it did not cloud. The Seraphine's smile tightened. State what you were sold as. Elara's throat constricted. She saw her mother's face, the tidy lies, the broker's ink-stained fingers. She felt the old humiliation rise like smoke. Then Kael's mother's words returned to her, though she'd never met her. Remember what it's like to be afraid. Elara spoke, and she did not flinch. They sold me as infertile, she said, because it was easier than admitting they were afraid of my future, afraid of my questions, afraid of the cost of keeping me. The Moonwell shimmered again, and this time a faint image rippled across its surface. Elara standing in a kitchen doorway, holding a torn ribbon while voices argued behind a closed door. The image wasn't cruel, it was quiet, and that quietness made it devastating. Elara's eyes filled, but she didn't look away. They said I was nothing, she continued, voice shaking but steady. But I'm still here, and I won't be used as anyone's excuse again. The council fell silent. Even Seraphine's composure wavered, just a fraction, as if she hadn't expected Elara to turn pain into spine. Kael stepped forward then, not into the Moonwell, not into the ritual, but into the truth. The test of voice has a second half, he said to Seraphine. The Seraphine lifted an eyebrow. It does not. Kael's gaze was steady. It should. A murmur moved through the hall. Kael turned slightly so the council could see his face fully, a king choosing vulnerability in a room that fed on it. I will speak as well, Kael said. The Seraphine's smile returned, sharp and pleased. How generous of your majesty. Kael ignored the bait. He faced the Moonwell, moonlight tracing the hard lines of his control. My name is Kael of Blackthorne, he said, voice carrying without force. And I have hidden behind duty because it was easier than risking love. The Moonwell shivered, and for a moment a vision flashed, Kael standing alone in a throne room, a crown on his head that looked like a weight on his throat, counselors circling like polite wolves. The image vanished as quickly as it came, but the message landed. Kael continued, quieter now. I accepted the council's bargains because I believed keeping peace mattered more than keeping my promise to be good. Elara's breath caught. He wasn't doing this for show, he was confessing. Then the Moonwell water went perfectly still again, and the Heartstone's deep heartbeat trembled through the floor, stronger than before. The candle flames leaned inward as if pulled by an unseen breath. Elara swayed. Kael moved instantly, catching her without gripping, holding her steady like she was something precious and fragile. Elara, he whispered, alarm breaking through his control. Her wrist mark flared, but the heat didn't stay there. It drifted inward into her chest, into her stomach, blooming into a warmth that felt impossibly gentle, like the first sunrise after a long winter. Seraphine stood up slowly, eyes narrowing with sudden calculation. Interesting, she murmured, almost to herself. A healer from the council stepped forward hesitant and raised a small crystal lantern that glowed pale blue. Your Majesty, the healer said, voice careful, may I check her pulse, only from a distance. Kael's jaw tightened. He didn't like it, but he nodded once. The healer lifted the lantern near Elara, not touching, and the blue light wavered, then split into two faint rhythms like music finding a second beat. The healer's eyes widened. "That's not possible," she whispered, "not this soon." Elara stared at the lantern, heart pounding. "What do you mean?" Kael's face went still, as if the world had shifted 1 degree and he could feel the axis change. He looked at Elara, not with fear of her, but with fear for her. Seraphine's voice cut through the hush, soft and satisfied. The prophecy wasn't poetry after all. Kael pulled Elara a fraction closer, protective in a way that felt like a vow of his own. "Elara," he said, barely audible, "the castle just confirmed something." Elara's lips parted, but no sound came out. Kael's eyes shone with shock, tenderness, and a rising dread of what the council would do with this truth. "You're not barren," he whispered, "and the 3 days have already started counting." Across the hall, Seraphine lifted her hand, calling the council to attention like a conductor raising a baton. "Prepare the second night," she announced, voice calm as snowfall. "The test of separation." Kael's grip tightened, not painful, just desperate with protectiveness as the meaning hit. Separation meant they would try to take Elara from him. And this time it wouldn't be with chains, it would be with law.